All right, everyone. It looks like we are at the top of the hour, so welcome to GroupBy. Thank you for joining us. My name is Andy Yoon. I'm going to be your moderator for this particular session. Please feel free to make use of the chat and/or the Q&A panels. I'll be monitoring that on behalf of our speaker of the hour, Greg. And I'll hand it over to you now, Greg.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Andy had asked earlier, and I'll add on. If you do have questions, feel free to ask them during that, and he'll pop them into me. I prefer questions during the presentation as opposed to at the end, because by then people have forgotten what it's about. Obviously, some questions work better at the end. But want to thank you for joining us, GroupBy, today. It's a real honor for me to speak to all of you. So first of all, code of conduct. This is something that I know is important for GroupBy. It's also important for me. So please, I'm sure you've seen the slide a dozen times today, but take a quick look at it, and let's all be nice out there and treat each other with some respect. So this is my slide about me. I was supposed to put a synopsis in there. I just realized I forgot to do that one step. So that big blank area is what I would talk about. I'm talking about PowerShell for DBAs today. And this is talk I gave at Past Summit a couple of years ago, the COVID Summit, as some were calling it. I called it a level 100 class, and it was the feedback I got was interesting. Some said, oh, that's like a 400, and others said, oh, that's a perfect 100. I don't know how to judge this, but what I would like to explain is this is not an intro to PowerShell per se. So there may be some things that I kind of gloss over in terms of PowerShell, where it is, what it is, and like that. There's a certain assumption that, hey, we're DBAs, so we're expected that we know a lot of stuff. If you do have questions about that, let me know at the end. I might be able to help you with that, point you in the right resource, the right direction. But this is really, how can, as a DBA, can I use PowerShell to make my job easier? And to me, that's an important part. I'll tell you right now, I like the term intelligently lazy. If I can script something and get it done, and then I can sit back and relax for a few minutes, I'm going to do that rather than do the same thing over and over again. And you'll see a common theme with these scripts. I've tried to kind of build upon a model there of starting with something simple and go through. But one thing I found in a lot of the scripts that I've written for my largest clients is really, it's a lot of times I'm just looping through stuff, and it sounds simple, especially as a DBA where we think of sets, but sometimes looping is the answer. You'll see there's a couple different ways of reaching me. All these scripts should be up on GitHub. I haven't checked lately. They were there last week, but I may have tweaked one or two for my demos, but everything up there should work with minor tweaks for your system, like if you have a specific server name or something like that. I do blog on a regular basis. Sometimes I even blog about PowerShell and SQL. I don't have a link here, but I have written a number of articles for Redgate. They're simple talk, and most of them about PowerShell. So a lot of the stuff that you see here, I've actually written further articles about that, and I refer you there because hopefully that you can take advantage of that. Skip that slide. The slides that gave me, we're back. Need sponsor idea. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. A little bit about me before we get started. Formerly director and VP of IT. I'm a consultant now at my largest client. I think my title we've decided is DBA and other duties is assigned, and they tend to assign me a lot of other duties, which is how I got kind of into the PowerShell sort of thing. Side of things. I do a lot of caving. I teach cave rescue. I love to bicycle, bake, cook, and I head up the capital area SQL Server user group here in Albany, New York, where I'm based out of. So I'd show you my outside. It's beautiful out there today, but let's focus on PowerShell and DBA stuff lest we get distracted. Okay, let's see. Is it not advancing? Okay, so I have an agenda today, and I'd like to start with this because I kind of want to make sure we're all on the same page of where we're headed with this. First of all, why PowerShell? This seems like an obvious question to some folks, but I'd like to explain my thinking behind it and give you, reasons why it does work and reasons why other things may work for you but don't work for me. What is a commandlet? Getting a module, this is a very quick slide. It's more just in case you don't already have this, which you all should. We're going to basically start with a fairly basic script. I'm going to kind of delve into that script, explain what it's doing, why it's written that way, and then using an array. Sounds like a simple thing, but this is kind of where I end up building a lot of my DBA scripts off of. A little talk about file IO and text versus JSON files. this is one that, again, I don't want to say gloss over, but it's kind of a really important topic here, because I use a variation on this at my largest client to automate a lot of the work that I do for them, and it's come in very handy. And I will say, by the way, I wrote this whole talk around what to me were useful things. So not much theory here. It was kind of focused on practical tasks and everything like that. So again, hopefully you can take some of that away with you. So the first question, of course, is why PowerShell? Well, as I said, I'm lazy. Well, sorry, I said I was intelligently lazy. Intelligently lazy to me is trying to automate stuff so that down the road, I just press a button and it gets done. I don't have to think about it more than once. I don't have to cut and paste the same script to a dozen different servers and compile stuff and everything like that. I'm sure a lot of us have been there. One of the things I really like about PowerShell, and this goes in two directions and can be a little confusing at times, but is important, is scripts can run on Windows or Linux. Now, when I started working with SQL Server, literally a century ago, well, not a century ago, but last century, SQL Server ran on Windows. That was it. So if you knew Windows, you were all set. But as most of us work with these days, and we all know, SQL Server will run on Windows or it will run on Linux. So we work in this world of multiple operating systems. And there are plenty of shops now where, quite honestly, they're doing all of their SQL Server in Linux. And that maybe they've got one or two Windows servers. So it's really helpful and handy to have a script that can run on either OS. So, and this is where I want to be clear, because I've gotten some confusion in the past. Not only does SQL Server run on both Windows or Linux, so do the PowerShell scripts. Now, there are some obvious limitations. I'm not going to write a PowerShell script that does GUI stuff, and I've written ones that do that. They won't work on Linux. Ones that work directly with the registry or with Active Directory tend not to work on Linux. There's certain things that may or may not, but you kind of have to watch out for that. All these demos here, I believe, work on Linux. I haven't tested every single one, but in theory, they should run on Linux. And as I said, simplify otherwise complex tasks. I have a script I wrote for my client that basically literally downloads a file from a vendor, decrypts it, unzips it, and then stuffs the data into various tables in a database. Trying to do this in SIS actually would work, but honestly, it was far more complex than doing it in PowerShell, where I really could just cut and paste and replicate stuff. So these are the reasons why I use PowerShell. Other folks use it for different ways. So the first thing that you may hear a lot with PowerShell are what's called commandlets. One of the original authors of PowerShell gave a whole talk on commandlets, why they called it that. The simple reason kind of comes down to, we had applications, and then of course now we had applets. So applets were like light applications. Well, commandlets are kind of like light commands. I'm not quite sure what you make of that, but he did say there's one really nice benefit, which I've taken advantage of. You can Google commandlet, or sorry, this Microsoft, you can Bing commandlets and actually get useful responses because it's such a unique word and everything like that. And I'm going to break this down on another slide, but I want to talk about just very quickly that PowerShell is very nice in the fact that it has this very standardized format of a verb, noun, get service, get help, show window. So you see stuff like this where once you start to get the feel for this, you can sometimes guess it. Well, what command would that be, or what commandlet would that be? Is, well, I know I want to get something, I want to get this, or I want to do that. So I can sometimes guess at stuff like that. And as you can see, there is help. And I believe I show that in one of my follow-up slides. So a couple quick notes about PowerShell. And this has come up in a lot of discussions, and I have a fellow DBA who will remain nameless, though I'll give a hint that she works a lot with Oracle. She likes Bash. I've got nothing against Bash, but there is a fundamental difference. Bash and the command line batch language that many of us grew up on, and some of us grew up on it in the DOS days, tend to be either file or string oriented. In other words, especially Bash and to a certain extent command language, you're piping a file from one command to another command through a pipe command or a redirect, something like that, and you're basically dealing with files. And honestly, 30, 40, 50 years ago, when Unix was first being written, this was a powerful way of doing things, and it actually made writing their bash scripts and shell scripts very easy because it just treated everything as a file. We've evolved beyond that. We actually now, in many cases, deal with objects. And this is a really kind of important concept to think of, that we're not just taking a file. File tends to be a flat-based thing, but we're dealing with an object, which means the object has properties. It has methods. We can do things to that object. So let me show that in my example here. Oops, right back to my right screen here. This get service. I mentioned this before, and I want to kind of break it down. We've got that verb get, so we're going to do something. What are we going to do? We're going to get services. That's pretty clear. And we have that pipe symbol. Where? Well, that's basically a short version of saying where object. And then with this kind of gibberish thing between the braces, $__name, like SQL. Well, it doesn't take too much effort to figure out that maybe this is going to try to find stuff where the name is like SQL. And sure enough, as show the results here, that's exactly what it does. Now I'm going to swap over to my script window here and run this real quick. And you'll see what I did is up here, I have that get service and I'm piping the results into the where object. This $_ is kind of a shorthand variable for take the most recent object and do something with it. In this case, look for something that's like SQL. You'll notice, by the way, that the Boolean here has a dash in front of it. I will tell you right now, if you're like me and you go from writing T-SQL to PowerShell and back in the same day, you will find yourself really messing up your Booleans. You'll start using greater than equal signs here, which does not work. Or worse, in T-SQL, you start trying to use dash, like, dash, LT for less than, things like that. It's just a mind frame, a code switching thing you have to do in your head. But I actually like this because it's much more readable, I think, than using a greater than sign or an equal sign or something like that. But the like one will throw you off because that's similar between T-SQL and PowerShell. So this is good. It shows me what I'm running here. And again, I'll expand that. Oops, sorry. And you'll see, again, it shows me the status, it's running. Here's that name. So I was focusing on that name, and here's the display name. So name is one of the properties of this object that get service returned. So let's hit enter and see what we get next. We got help. We got a lot of help. We got more help than we could possibly use here about help. It's telling us what we can do. Not too bad, but not too useful. But let's move on with this, see what more we can do. So now what I've done, oops, I keep hitting the wrong button there, is I've said get help on get service. I'm basically saying, what do I want help on? I want help on this specific commandlet. And you'll notice now it's giving me that help that is specific to that. It's giving me examples. Sorry, scroll down here. Based on that, and it's showing me some of the different things that can happen. It's useful, but I'm not a big fan of scrolling. But we notice that some of the parameters that I could pass to it, I could pass, for example, a computer name. In this case, I passed it the name of my desktop here, Mansfield, and it returned the object. I could pass the name of another machine. So, for example, I could write a script that gets the service on a dozen different machines to find out, is SQL Server stopped? Is agent stopped? What's going on? I would just put that in a single file or a loop and loop over it and get all that information back. Now, in this case, I'm running SQL Server Express, so I expect SQL Server agent to be stopped. Now, I'm going to kind of throw a question out there. You don't have to answer per se. If this were a live audience, I'd probably be polling you and pointing folks out there. So you're lucky that I won't pick on you this way. But if there's a get service, you might stop and think, well, is there a start service or a stop service? And there is. I can use PowerShell to actually do stuff like that. Let's get back to this help for a second. This is good. This works, and this sort of help will work on Linux or Windows. The next one I'm about to show you will not work on Linux. At least last time I tested with that. You notice now I actually have this nice graphical user interface, this nice window that actually breaks things down. I can scroll through this and I can get more detailed help. I can see the syntax for this. I can see some examples. And because it's a window of itself, I can keep this up and, especially if you've got 2 or 3 monitors like me, you can throw that in one monitor and keep working PowerShell on the other monitor. So that's kind of an example of the things that you can do with the get help. And I want to point out down here, by the way, again, I'll expand that. It is showing some of the other options of I've got new service, restart service, stop and start service. Again, that verb noun format. And I may be saying that multiple times, but I think it's an important concept to understand of that verb and noun format in there. Now, I mentioned, and I'm going to run this again because I hit enter one too many times, that I'm dealing with an object. Well, in this case, I'm taking get service, which we've been working with, and I'm piping it into something called get member, which is going to show me basically what does the object that get service returns, what does it have? Well, notice it's got name, which is really an alias property for service name. It's got methods, and again, we see the start and stop, but we see these other properties. So I could actually search for things like, can it stop? What's its service name? What's its current status? I could, if I wanted to, do a get service, show me all the ones where it's stopped. That sort of useful thing. So that's kind of a quick show and tell of objects and how they work and everything like that. Now that we've talked about objects, let's talk about SQL, because we're all DBAs, and let's be honest, that's what we came here for. We wanted to talk about SQL and see what we can do with this. So let me find my right window here, and that's the one problem with this particular demo is I just have too many things going on here. Okay, what I did here, and let me kind of break this down again just as a quick thing, is I basically just set a variable, and notice I use this variable here, which is a environment variable for my home drive, path, everything like that. Here's my path for this, and I save that to a variable. PowerShell variables tend to start with a $. Then I did CD, so looks just like DOS, not a big thing there. I'm changed directory. This import module, I'll talk about a little bit later, but we have to often import a module, in this case, the SQL Server module. And I'll talk about installing that on the next slide. But let's talk about the next thing I'm going to do here, which is get PS drive. So get PS drive is this weird thing. I'll make this window a little bigger to show you. And again, it looks like it's just showing drive letters C, D, E, but notice it's got these other things there: environment, function, HK. Well, here it's showing me registry stuff. I could actually start to look at the registry as an object. But the one I am most interested in is this SQL object. What PS drive tells me is basically stuff that I can, believe it or not, change directory to or get the child item for. So I'm going to set my location to my SQL server. Notice I didn't say to my drive or anything like that. I am actually setting my location to SQL Server. So what happens when we do a directory on that? I have a bunch of objects within my SQL Server: audits, backed up devices, endpoints, logins, mail, roles, databases. So get child items. Get child items I'm going to say, well, actually, dir is an alias for get child items. Notice they return the exact same thing here. I'm actually treating SQL Server just like a directory structure. Here's my databases: ACE, AdventureWorks, SSD, System Resources. Here's the size, here's the recovery model. So again, what child items is doing isn't just returning a directory structure, it's returning an actual object. This object, among the properties it has a name, what the status is, what the size is. That's kind of useful, but what can I do with that? Well, let's save that to a variable. And now I want to use my where object, which can be shortened to where. And I want to notice that equal dash EQ. And I'm taking databases. I'm saying, take the object databases that I just created up here, pipe it into my where, and search for recovery model equals simple. And you'll notice here, it only returns the databases that are in simple recovery mode. Up here, it was showing all the databases, but now I filtered down for just the databases in simple mode. Obviously, if I can do simple mode, I can also do full mode. The only database in full mode on this machine happens to be the SSIS database. So imagine again, if you're tasked with a single SQL server, let's be honest, I would do this in T-SQL, just select from databases and get all information. But I could write a script in PowerShell where I cycle over 3, 4, a dozen, 2 dozen, 100 SQL servers and get all my list of all my databases that are in simple mode. Because maybe I've come into a new job, and a little aside here, I'm going to give you a little hint. When I say maybe, that often means this has happened at one of my clients. I just don't want to embarrass the client by saying it actually happened or by saying their name. So maybe I've gone into one of my clients and they said, yeah, we don't know what databases are being backed up or what sort of recovery model they have. And I go in there and find out that their main database, the one that their company relies on, is in simple recovery mode and gets backed up once a week to null. That hasn't quite happened, but I have had ones where they back it up once a week, that's it. And they worry about what would happen if it crashed on a Friday afternoon. And I have to tell them nothing good. So I can write a script like this and go through 100 SQL servers in a matter of seconds if I need to. So let's use that get member again and look at all the properties that my database object I created has. I mean, it's active connections, active directory, assemblies, is auto shrink on or off, the creation date, DBO log and events. So I could really drill down and look at specific properties if I wanted to. And let's do just that. When we do that, we have to tell PowerShell, hey, focus on just these 2 or 3 properties. So I'm going to look at just the name and the file group, because again, where are my databases being stored? Okay, in this case, ACE really only has the one file group. VentureWorks has the one, but maybe I find out I have other file groups. Again, I use this kind of as a what if when I go into clients to find out what are they doing there. I can go one step further, by the way. Remember how I said I could look at the objects on the database server this way? Well, let's change directory. And I've just changed directories to my databases / AdventureWorks / tables. And I'll just do a quick directory there. And well, look, there's all my tables with a bunch of objects, a bunch of information about them. Because again, PowerShell knows enough to treat this as a smart object. And again, dir is just an alias for get child item. So I get child item, I get the same result. So you can use either one in that case, depending on what your needs are. So again, I'm going to, excuse me there, store the results of get child item into a new variable or a new object with a variable name of tables. And I want to find all the ones that are owned by the schema human resources. So again, I'm going to take that object, pipe it into this where clause, and then take the results and save that to a new object called DBO tables. And now, this is the first time I'm going to actually do a loop here, and I want to demonstrate this real quick. DBO tables was my object. This object actually contains, if you want to use the term, multiple sub objects, and I'm sure some folks who know PowerShell well now are shuddering at my usage of that term. But I'm going to say for every table in my DBO tables, I want to loop over that. So I'm going to save that to a new variable, and then I'm going to take that and just select out that properties. And look, I get row count and name. And notice I can put my properties in whatever order makes sense to me. So now I know that my department table that's owned by human resources has 16 rows in it. My employee table has 290, so on and so forth. So that's kind of one way I like to look at SQL Server. And I use this from time to time as a way of getting into SQL Server. But I really like as an introduction of thinking, again, PowerShell is about objects. SQL Server is just, hate to say it, a glorified object to PowerShell. Granted, it's a pretty powerful glorified object, but it's just an object at the end of the day. Now, I mentioned you might have to install a module. If you have SQL Server Management Studio installed, this should be installed. It's still worth sometimes getting the latest version. And to do that, you have to run as an administrator, install module, the name of the module, and allow Clobber basically, yep, you can overwrite what's there. You might have to do a -force in there. I upgraded this machine just last week. Again, that's just really saying PowerShell, yep, I want the latest version. I want you to overwrite the old one. That's fine by me. So on and so forth. That's about the only thing I'm going to say about install module. There are literally hundreds of modules out there. For example, there's one for using SFTP. I had to do this for my client because I had to download some SFTP files. So I just found out the name of the module, said install module, installed it, boom, I was done. So I keep talking about the fact that we can run over multiple servers. But I'll be honest, actually, I was going to say my house right now, I probably have 3 or 4 SQL servers running on 3 or 4 different pieces of hardware. I might have, actually, if I count my Linux version, I probably have 5 or 6 SQL servers running, but some of them have production data, some of them have proprietary client data, so I can't really show those. So I want to spin up some more SQL servers. So bear with me while I do that. Let's see, spin up. So I think 4 more SQL servers should be adequate for the rest of this demo. So, you know, in the old days doing all this, we'd have to get Hyper-V up and running, download the ISO, run the ISO, do that. And, you know, by the time I've been doing that, Andy would be going home for dinner and everything like that. You guys would all be asleep because this thing would be over by then. This is not the old days. This is the 21st century. This is year 2022 of the 21st century. We use Docker for stuff like this. And what I just did, and it took literally looking at this about 18 seconds, I just spun up 18 SQL servers. And if you look over here, 2 of them are running 2019 and 2 of them are running 2017 because I want a little variety. I want to kind of replicate what I might see in an actual work environment. If you have not worked with Docker, I would highly recommend you start taking time to learn it. I taught myself for this demo for Summit 2 years ago, everything I needed to know about Docker for this demo in about an hour or 2. There's a lot more to learn, but this is all I needed for now. And I want to kind of show what the script is because this gets a little complicated, but it's useful. Again, basically, I just went to my home directory. I'm going to set up port. How many instances do I want? I wanted 4 instances. And actually, I think in my script, I changed this to 1 and 2, but I want to make 2 of them SQL 2017. So I use this @ symbol, which basically is short for an array. I create an array that has 2 elements, and the elements are 2 and 4. And then this other one, actually, I'm going to go to show you the script. The script is a little more up to date. So yeah, as you see here, I did the 2 versions of 1 and 2. The second part here, I'm going to mention this in passing because it's an important concept. And I literally could probably talk about this for 20 minutes, but I'm not going to because I'm not prepared on it. But there are times when you may need to run SQL Server or connect to SQL Server using a secure password. Ideally, you're using Active Directory, but as I mentioned, you can't do this on Linux, so you may have to have another way of doing this. This is one of the few cases I really will say go to Redgate, Simple Talk, Greg Moore. I have an article on secure strings. What I've done here is I've created this file called credential SA with my name attached to it that is stored securely. So anybody could come along, like Andy could come along as he's, a devious person, come along, log into my account, or not log into my account, but take my computer, look at that directory. But since he's not me, all he would see is a .txt file that's encrypted data. But running as me, I can get that out, and I'm going to associate that with SA, and I can actually then do stuff as SA in my demos, which we'll talk about in a few more demos, because as we know, everything should run as SA. That way we know it runs. It'll never run into a problem, right? No, not so much. And then I basically I boot up Docker, do some port mapping, stuff like that, and say what the SA password is going to be the first time I run it. So let's see my next slide. Okay, so we've got 4 things up and running. I'm going to start with one of those right now. I'm basically just going to get the databases on there. I'm going to do 2 things here. First, I'm going to just get the database on my first one. And notice it scrolled through. It got kind of messy, but there's 4 databases, which we would expect: master, tempdb, and msdb, and all that stuff. I want some more databases. So I'm going to, again, use PowerShell to create some databases. I'm going to explain what I'm doing here. And this is, again, an example of where using a for loop is going to be useful. Again, you can see I'm using my secure password, which no one can read except for me, because I'm secure that way. And I'm going to use that verb noun format that we keep talking about, invoke SQL, and I'm going to give it an instance name. Now, in this case, I'm looping from 1 to 4. That's what this loop statement is doing. And I have to give each one a different server port because they're running all on the same machine, everything like that. And I'm basically going to then give it a query. Oops, sorry about that. So my first query is, I'm going to create a database. I'm going to alter the database. I'm going to create a new login called SA1 or SA2, SA3 for that database. And then I'm going to also, for that server, then I'm also going to give that new account sysadmin privileges. And we'll see why in a few other slides. I'm also going to create a second database called passdemo120 and set the compatibility level. Again, the thing to focus on here is not the SQL, because let's be honest, this is T-SQL. We could run all this in our sleep. But the point is, I can loop over my 4 databases and do this all at once. I don't have to cut and paste from machine to machine. Again, 2 or 3 servers, I could do that pretty easily. But let's say I was told I had to spin up 20 SQL servers, and I had to put a specific user on every SQL server, SA type login or something like that, or I had to create a specific database on everyone. For example, one of my clients, we have a database we called admin tools. Every time we spin up a new server, we install this database called admin tools. Typically, we spin up 1 server at a time, but if I had to spin up 4 or 5, I would create a script like this just to automate it all and not have to cut and paste. Again, it's that intelligently lazy. I'm going to be smart about it. Tell them it's going to take half an hour, run the script, be done in 5 minutes, and then tell them I'm going to go out and get a drink of coffee or something like that. It might work better if I actually drink coffee, but you get the basic idea. So again, if I run this, it's going to run a little longer, because now you'll see, again, I'm not formatting this any specific, oops, it helps if I actually, where did that go? Actually, I actually run the script to create the databases, so I apologize. And the hazards of live demos, of course, is sometimes things take longer or less time than otherwise. Okay, so I just, across my 4 servers, created 2 databases on each one, added my special SA _1 or _2 on all 4 servers, and then made that new login a member of the sysadmins group. Again, that took 15 seconds, maybe, a lot faster than cutting and pasting to all these machines. Now, if I run this, I will see that I have my extra databases. You can see right there, there's passdemo 120, there's compatibility level 120, so on and so forth. Okay, but that's good enough, but that's really not good enough because I can't read any of that. That doesn't make any sense to me. So we're going to, again, take these results. Again, select start from this database. I'm not doing anything fancy here. I'm going to log in as SA, using that secure password. I'm going to save the results and to a new object I'm going to call databases. Now, notice I introduced a new commandlet here called write host. Going back to that verb noun, pretty clear. What's that going to do? It's going to write to the host, in this case, my screen. Notice I get this really weird thing down here, which doesn't seem to make much sense. System data row, system data row, system data. What the heck is that? This is one of the cases where basically write host is saying, hey, you gave me an object. I have no clue how to display this on the screen. I don't know what you want me to do with this object. I'm just going to tell you that, hey, the object has some data rows in it. You figure it out. So the first option I can have is something called format table and then outstring it. Again, a couple more commandlets. Well, this is kind of nice now. Now I see my databases. I got 6 of them, just like I expect. The ID, source ID, when they were created. By the way, these times are all in UTC, so they're off my time. I didn't bother resetting the time on my Docker containers. And the version, the compatibility, again, notice they're all 140 except for this one in user access. Now, in this case, format table is a kind of interesting object or commandlet. It will format stuff, try to format so it fits on your screen. So if you have a wider screen, you may see more stuff. If you have a narrower screen, you may see less stuff, but it's still a very useful thing. Remember that, I just remember something I hadn't introduced yet. One of my favorite commandlets is this out grid view. Again, unfortunately, does not work on Linux unless things have changed radically since last time I tried. Of course, it comes up on my other screen. Let me pull this over. Notice now I've outgraded to this nice GUI grid view, and notice it shows all the properties. I'm scrolling all the way to the right here. There's all sorts of stuff. There's temporal history retention enabled, optimization for snapshot. I don't care about that stuff. I really kind of care about this area. I use this a lot, and I'll show you one of the reasons I use this one a lot, and it's really kind of powerful for me. So if you notice this option here, add criteria. Well, what's that do? Well, let me add a criteria. It shows all my properties. I'm going to select compatibility level here, and it will default to is less than or equal to. So I'm going to say, is it less than or equal to 120? And notice what that's done is it's allowed me in a GUI to filter down to my one database that is 120 compatibility level. I used this recently with one of my clients. We literally had to go through about 400 files and look for a particular string. And within that string, I then had to look for some specific information. So I wrote a quick script using getChildItem and some other commandlets to basically go through a whole subdirectory, curse over it, get me a list of all the files that contained the thing I was looking for, pipe it to out grid view, and then I could look for, within that list, I could look for more specific criteria. And this was a perfect example of being intelligently lazy. That made me look good, because what was happening was the vendor told my client, you never sent us file XYZ. And we had 400 files that we'd sent them over the past 400 days, something like that. So I was able to, in literally less than 2 or 3 minutes, say, here's the file, here's the date we sent it to you, and here's the string proof that we sent and everything like that. PowerShell to the rescue, and we were able to move on. Now, I like making my client look good because they pay my paychecks, and if I make them look good, they're happy with that. Oh, I just saw the question there, Curtis. I will try to get that Docker one up on GitHub. I was not aware it's not there. Okay, let's keep going further with this now, because again, we can look for specific properties with that database object. So now I want the compatibility level. In this case, I said I'm just going to kind of write it out ugly, but you can see that I've created, in this case, not really an array, but an assembly of objects. Master 140 correlation name, that's what I asked for it to give. But notice that there's really no order to this. It's just the order that SQL Server returned it with my select statement. And we all know that selects without order bys have no order. But I can enforce an order within PowerShell if I want. So now I've enforced the order by the name. And we can see here, up here, tempdb is out of order. Here, tempdb is exactly where I expect it at the very bottom, because I've said, hey, I want to sort by name. I could have sorted by compatibility level. For example, if I was looking for a compatibility level 120. I can even go further and write things out. So I wanted to find any databases that had a compatibility level of 120. But I also want to show the collation name. And I decided to add a little color to make it stand out. So now I know my one database on this server happens to be past demo 120_1. I got to do something with that. So again, I want to talk about the loops, the things that we can do with this. I'm going to just very quickly run through a loop here. My first loop basically showed me what the databases were, and this shows me with some formatting that database name is master, collation is this. If I want to get really fancy, I could have done a nice tabs and everything like that, so everything lined up. But again, I just wanted to show that, again, this for each is a good way of looping. As a DBA, we typically don't think about looping, but there are times when it can be very useful. So let's take a look at all 4 of our servers now. And again, I'm going to kind of delve into this a bit here. There's my secure password. I mentioned doing file IO. I'm going to remove this logins.csv file if it exists, which I know it does because I left it over from last time. But notice this new thing I've done here. I've created another array, and I've put my 4 instances in there. The instance name and the port name happen the same in the way I set this up, so it's pretty easy to remember. And I'm going to loop over, or for each specifically, my 4 instances. So for each instance, what am I going to do? I'm going to do this. I'm going to get a list of logins, and I'm going to write that out to a file. So you'll notice it wrote it on the screen, says, hey, by the way, you've got the following logins enabled, SA and SA1. And that got saved out to a file with some other information. Again, it's not a super easy file to make sense of because it's a CSV file, but I've got instance name 1434, SA false, so that's is it disabled? Nope, that's false. Policy check, it's true, that's good. Is expiration check? That's false. So I've done that for each of these. I could import this into a CSV file if I wanted to. So this might be useful because someone's coming to say, hey, what logins do we have across our dozen servers? Again, if it's one server, I'm just going to run my SQL statement like this, boom, boom, boom. But when I'm talking about a dozen, 2 dozen servers, I don't have to be cutting and pasting. That fails that intelligently lazy rule I have. That's become just unintelligently busy. So now I've sent that log into our auditor, and our auditor has said, hey, what's going on with all these SA enables? I don't like that. You need to get rid of that. I could do a raise of hands, but I bet a lot of you would say, yep, our auditors don't allow SA. It's a common thing to not allow. So our next thing that we're told is, okay, you've got to disable all those SA logins. So I'm thinking about, oh God, I got 100 servers. I got to go in. This is going to be a pain. But again, I'm smart about this, mostly. I'm one cheat here. Again, here's my instances. I'm going to go through here and I'm going to try to disable this password or disable the SA account, but I got to log into someone else. Now, in this case, I did not bother encrypting this password. in real life, I absolutely would, or if it's running on Windows, I'd use an Active Directory account to do this. And then I'm just going to increment my I by 1 because that's how I keep track of what I'm doing here. So I'm going to run this fairly quickly. I've just disabled the SA password across all 4 of my servers. That took not even a second, I think, to happen. Let's see. So we're going to do this one step further because, again, I like to be intelligently lazy. I want to make sure that we've done this right and that I'm going to get a nice email about this. So again, I've taken my 2 scripts ago that did my login, said basically select the instance name and all that, and write it out on here, put it to my logins fix.csv file, and oh, look at this, I'm going to email it to myself. Now, if I wanted to, I could email it directly to the auditor, but let's do this. And hopefully that's showing up on your screen. Here you go, SAs are disabled. Let's see if it'll open in Excel. Last time it didn't open correctly in Excel. Yeah, there's something, I've got to fix the script. It's not correctly opening in Excel. But you'll see, is policy check lines up with true. So my SA password is now disabled across all my servers. So hopefully now I can send that to my auditor, get the auditor off my back. I can go have some real fun doing real SQL DBA work, not just making auditors happy. Don't need that script there. Okay, let's see. I got some questions in here. Good question, Brian. I honestly, I have not really used Central Management Server. You're right. You probably could use that also if you wanted to. Thanks, Andy. Okay, let me get to my next script here. Close these out so I can see what I'm doing. Okay, show file types. Where's my show file types? There we go. So one of the things that I've done for a lot of my work with my client is I've created two files. One is a straight text file, and the other one, and some of you can cringe when you hear this, it's a JSON file. So let me go real quick through this, load them in. And again, all I've basically done is basically found the path, taken the file instance, and get the content into an object. So if we look at the text file, not much to it. It just has 4 lines that basically have the names of my instances in there. My JSON file is a little nicer. Oops, I gotta press enter, that's why. This is what the raw JSON looks like. I've now got a server name in there. I've got an environment name in there, and I got the SQL version name in here. And I think, Brian, my next example is going to show you one way that I use PowerShell very effectively for looping over service like that. So notice now I can actually break stuff down by dev or prod, or I can break it down by SQL version. For my client, I actually do some deploys based on product. I can say this product is located on servers A and B, this product on servers B and C, deploy it as I tell you to through this. So let's format that a little bit, because that's not the neatest thing to read, and it's a little more obvious this way. Now I've converted, I can see I have my servers, my environment, my SQL version all lines up nice and easily. I can see I've got a dev for 2017 and a production for 2017, dev for 2019 and production for 2019. If I had multiple production servers, I could just add them to that JSON file, and that's what I do with my client. So now this is where, in my mind, things have gotten interesting for me. So I will, let's see, I've written this little deploy script. And let's show kind of what it does briefly. Talk about more advanced scripting. And again, this is not a whole how to PowerShell. There's a lot of articles on this. I do have one on using parameters and everything like that, but I'm going to talk about this. So I've included this parameter item here. And I'm basically saying, hey, my first parameter is not only going to be mandatory, I'm going to give it a validate set. And I'll show you what that means in a second. But basically, it simply means that I can only enter dev or prod for my environment. This saves me a lot of trouble. And again, I have the similar thing for what version of SQL I'm running. You know, there is no SQL 2018, so I don't want to make a typo and have my script blow up because of that. And, you know, I don't know the database name in advance, and I could have 100 different database names. So I don't want a validate set for that, but I do want to make it mandatory because we have to say what database we're deploying this to. And then obviously, what am I patch file am I doing? So I'm going to take this JSON file, load that back in. And again, since I disabled SA correctly, I have to use my kind of mock SA account. And I'm going to load the script I found online. I've heard it's a pretty good script, but I only want to load it on my dev environment first. You know, because who knows what it's going to do, but the script, who is active.sql, some guy online wrote it. I want to check it out. I hear it's pretty useful. So notice what's going to happen here. I'm running my script, deploy SQL file.ps1. I've said what environment. I don't care what version of SQL Server I install on. I want on all my versions in my dev environment. And I'm going to put it in the model database because that way when I make new databases, it'll automatically get deployed. And notice it tells me it did just that. It deployed it to 1434 and 1436, which are dev servers. And I didn't specify a version, so it said any. Pretty useful right there. And this is an area where, again, because I can break it down by version or whatever, I can do it. Now what's happened is everybody says, oh, that's a great script. We want to keep that. So now I go in, and now you should start to see how this validate set works. Remember how I said I only had my dev and prod environment? I can only type dev and prod in there. Different tools, by the way, have different rules for tab completion. Sometimes I think in Visual Code now you actually have to hit tab or something to actually have it come up, but ISE, even though it's deprecated, I like because it automatically comes up. And we're going to say any again. And notice, by the way, as I use up my parameters, fewer and fewer ones show up in my list, which makes it easier for me. I don't duplicate parameters. I can't say prod twice because it just won't let me. See, database disappeared, but now patch files there. And we're just going to say who is active and deploy that to my production environment, since we validated it on dev and nobody had any complaints about that. So I'm going to run two more kind of quick scripts to show this again. Again, in this case now, notice I have specified which database version I wanted. I only want it on my 2017 environment. I'm going to create a demo table there. And now it's only created it on that dev environment running 2017. Did not install in 2019 because I didn't tell it to install in 2019. I said dev and 2017 only. And now comes along and says, okay, that's good, Greg. Everybody's happy. Let's deploy it to production. And it should deploy to production. Oh, remember on my production server, it's got a different database name and deployed to my production environment. Now, what I do with my client, I have scripts similar to this. I've added one step. I've added actually two steps. One is on a successful deploy, it now writes that to a database. Again, I'm a DBA, so I like to keep things in a database. I can I have a list of all the changes that I've deployed to our production environment going back months. And if someone says, hey, when did we deploy this? I can look in my data and say, yep, it was deployed at such and such date. They also use change codes for everything, which makes it handy because that's a field in my database. And then I just move the file out of the directory to someplace else so that I don't keep it around anymore, getting my way. So what I've tried to do here is kind of introduce you to PowerShell, get the idea that we're dealing with object. SQL Server can be treated as one massive object, but also when I'm dealing across multiple SQL servers, I can use PowerShell to loop over that. And also through the use of like a JSON file or a text file, though I find JSON a lot more powerful, I can not only loop over a bunch of SQL servers, I can say I want to loop over SQL servers based on these criteria, this group. And as you can see, I can mix and match. I can say, do it by version of SQL Server, do it by production or UAT, or in my large client's case, do it by the platform. What product am I putting on what SQL Server? Because I actually, right now, for example, they're migrating from 2016 to 2019, and all my production releases get deployed to product foo on the 2016 and 2019 server. I don't have to worry about that. But then I have other scripts for that I run for my tools that I want to cross all the 2017 servers, but not the 2019 servers, or vice versa, or something like that. So I can make these scripts as powerful as I want to mix and match stuff like that. Now, just before I conclude, one of the nice things is, I'm going to clean up after myself. I created 4 Docker instances. I'm going to just blow them away now because I don't need them running in the background of my machine, taking up memory and everything like that. One gone. 2 gone. 3 gone. And shortly 4 gone. And this is just another Docker container I've got left over from, actually it was a SQL Saturday I think I attended a year and a half ago, it looks like at this point. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what items, just a hint at what I can use PowerShell for. Now, a question that comes up, and I'm going to nip this in the bud, hopefully, and it's a perfectly fair question, is, well, Greg, what about DBA tools? DBA tools, if you're not familiar with it, go to dbatools.io, download it and install it if you can. And I say if you can, not because there's a problem with the tools, they're great. And I think one of the speakers earlier today was speaking on them, but because of my particular client, I've just run into some security issues because my client is very, shall we say, security conscious to the point where even some basic stuff sometimes is hard to do. So I don't use DBA tools there. I do use it at another client because it's very helpful. DBA tools also is very useful for automating a lot of stuff that, moving credentials from one machine to another, moving an entire database, things like that. In my experience, DBA tools are a little more, I almost want to say, high level at a very good way. And the scripts that I write tend to be very narrow and specific, but I tend to have like this for loop kind of pre-written, open it up, put inside the loop what I want it to do, save it on a different name, and then do what I want to do with that, which for my needs, for my particular client, is a more effective way of doing it. So I guess the next slide was the diving deep. So we already did that. So we can come up for fresh air here. Just some closing stuff. I see Andy did put my GitHub in there. Please feel free to comment on that. I will look on there about the script that someone asked about. I do expand upon several of these concepts at Simple Talk, so please work with them, and we'll see what questions we have. So see Scott had to bounce. I'm glad you could make it. Thank you very much. And I'm going to open up to questions at this point. Andy, I don't know if anybody messaged you privately, but feel free to pass on comments or questions.
I have no questions at this time, or everything that's been passed in privately, you can also have visibility on as well. So no, great session and great job. And by the way, that the one bit about DBA tools, that session is coming up in about 30 minutes.
Oh, is it? Okay. For
So
some reason I thought it was this morning.
So yeah, Ben Miller will be presenting on DBA tools, and I for one really love DBA tools, and I'm only a PowerShell novice. That's also the other reason why I decided to moderate this session and the next session, so I can hopefully learn a little bit, a few other tidbits. But here's the thing: so I started working at Pure Storage about 7 months ago now, and now I have to be able to spin up SQL servers on demand or rapidly, on a very frequent basis. And oftentimes I need full instances because I'm testing other things in the IO stack,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So to be able to do stuff like that, I use a combination of like Chocolatey, DBA tools, and DBA tools for migrations is also really fantastic. So if you got to move stuff around and whatnot, I'm finding that I really love DBA tools, and really wish I had access to it back in my operational DBA days.
Definitely. Yeah, my regret is, like I say, with my largest client where I literally spend most of my days, I just, because of the security model, I've had trouble running it and installing it. It's like, God, this would just make life easier. So, but yeah, and the folks who work on it are just great folks. So.
Oh yeah. Great bunch of folks that are really a whole hell of a lot smarter than I am. That's for
Yeah.
sure. So, but it's awesome that you can even contribute to it. You can engage with them. They're all very, involved in the community and whatnot. And many of them are also fellow speakers. So,
Yep, definitely. Any other questions out there? And thank you, Curtis, for your feedback. Appreciate that. And thank you, David and Raymond.
So what I'll ask everyone to do real fast, I ask people to do this in my own sessions, but if this session met your expectations, at least throw into the chat like a quick +1 or a -1 or whatever, just so that we can get a quick bit, a little bit of feedback, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Thank you.
Kind of the virtually equivalent of a round of applause or a round of boos.
I haven't gotten booed yet, though. I almost presented a one-person SQL Saturday, but they then left to go to another session. So.
Yeah, I've never had that few people show up to a session of mine, but at that point I'd be like, all right, guys, do you want to hear about this, or do you want to have a discussion and just talk shop, or shall we all just bounce and go to another session?
That's what it was. What happened was the last one on Saturday. It had been like rainy all week, and by the afternoon it was sunny out, and I really couldn't blame people for wanting to get outside. So.
Yep. It happened to me once at a Chicago SQL, or not a Chicago, it wasn't a SQL event, but it was a Chicago code camp. And I was doing a more of a professional development session. And I only had 3 people show up. So it just turned into a round robin kind of businessy type discussion, which was a lot of fun. It was a little disappointing when I'm looking around like, this is it. Okay, well, I mean, it is prof dev, so, it is a bit of a niche, but we still had a good one. Oh, hey, there is a question in here.
There is. I don't do much monitoring with PowerShell myself. I do stick to SQL, to special tools. My largest client, they do a lot of their own monitoring, and I just get the alerts. I think
so. If I may chime in at this point, I may have used to work for a monitoring company for many years called SentryOne. So I have a little bit of bias there. All I'm going to say is just monitor your SQL servers in some way, shape, or form. If you got access to Query Store, if you're on a newer version of SQL Server, please use Query Store. Save stuff out to a DBA database or whatever the case may be. If you can afford a third-party monitoring tool, I would strongly suggest looking into it, because you know what? Just pay someone else to do the hard work rather than suck up your own time and burn your own cycles maintaining a DIY solution. Of course, Idera, being a sponsor of GroupBy, makes one. SentryOne was purchased by SolarWinds. Redgate, in my opinion, is probably the premier one these days. That's the one I would be going to if I went back into the field and had become an operational DBA and said, hey, go pick a third-party monitoring tool. I'd go Redgate all the way.
Yeah, I'm going to jump on what Andy said. Again, as a consultant, I sometimes see the best, not often, and often the worst, all too often, of setups. And a lot of them is they have no monitoring. And it's, hey, Dev, it's impossible to really know what's going on if you don't have monitoring. And I tend to be platform agnostic. Again, I partially Redgate for multiple reasons, but what Andy said, monitor stuff. Query Store, by the way, if you're not familiar with that, I would definitely start getting familiar with that, because I've used that multiple times to diagnose and debug issues. Go from there.
So Chris has thrown into
Yep.
into the chat about another question about CMS. So, Greg did kind of try to answer this a little bit. I don't know if you want to dive into that a little bit more or not.
Yeah, I did try to answer this, and it's a fair question. I'll be honest, I just never really developed a fondness for CMS. Nothing against it. I think it's just the way I develop things. But where I found PowerShell is because, and again, being able to filter and do a lot more of the I think filtering and selection, like I showed in the last few demos, is one of the more useful areas. I think what happens though is, for example, and I did not go into this because it's more of a dev side of things, but I mentioned earlier on, as a DBA with other duties assigned, for my client, I had to basically write a script that would download stuff from an SFTP server, decrypt it, unzip it, and load it into SQL Server. And so that's not using the tools here, but it is definitely using a bunch of PowerShell that really can't do anything. And yes, some folks would say, well, use SSIS or use something like that. I've done another one like that. And honestly, the PowerShell for what it did was a whole lot easier than the SSIS. Oh, no problem. I'd much rather someone ask a question twice and get it answered than not.
So here's one thing, I'll chime into this as well. So CMS is, in my opinion, just my personal opinion, is perfectly good if you just want to do one round trip informational kind of dump. But the thing about PowerShell that's really powerful is that you can do multiple things because it's object oriented, because I can go out to multiple servers, get information, and then continue to do something against that information, right? So if you think about it in that kind of context, rather than just something very simplistic, like go to these 10 servers and just give me a list of all databases, right? CMS is perfectly acceptable for something like that. And both are perfectly acceptable. It's just two ways of approaching it, right? But if you want to get a little bit more complex in depending on what problem it is you're trying to solve, that's where PowerShell can really shine.
Right. I'm going to come back to Raymond's question. Brian, yeah, good point. If you're using it just for SQL code, I focus on that here because it's a easy introduction for it. If you're doing just SQL code, CMS will also work. But as Andy said, how often are we doing just SQL code? We're often doing the SQL code, manipulate it, do something with it, find a report and everything like that. Back to your question, Raymond. I would say, like anything you do with SQL Server, just think about what you're doing. Again, as a DBA, as a SQL Server, I think in sets on the SQL side. For PowerShell, I'm thinking in terms of looping over. So make sure that you're not starting to write trigger is the word that's coming to mind, but that's the word I'm thinking for. Loops in SQL, stuff like that. I haven't really run into major performance things. Any performance thing you saw today was more my machine and Docker, just trying to virtualize that. I've run this across, machines running gigs and gigs of data coming through them without any real issues in terms of performance. So nothing stands out of mind. Just keep in mind your normal, DBA stuff of do's and don'ts. Cursors, that's the word I was thinking for. Don't start writing cursors in PowerShell. They don't perform any better.
All right, awesome. Any other questions from the audience? Nope, don't do cursors, Raymond. Or we agree with you.
On the same page.
Yes, absolutely. I will say, though, unpopular opinion, cursors do have their place in a small, limited use case.
Yep.
In my, one thing I always like to say is that SQL Server has a lot of trade-offs, right? And of course, cursors have a huge trade-off. But there are some use cases where cursors are perfectly acceptable, or it's good enough, right?
Yeah,
I will admit, I can count them on one hand.
I will admit, I've got a few scripts that I have cursors in because honestly, it's a whole lot easier to write the cursor, and it's something I'll run, as a one-off, and a lot easier to write it that way than try to find the set-based solution and save myself a split second of performance on the one-off.
If I may share a funny story, just because we're kind of burning some time right now until the next presentation in about 25 minutes. I was in an interview once, and the guy asked me to write a cursor. That was his very first T-SQL question to me. I'm like, what? Are you crazy? I don't know how to do that off the top of my head because I don't write them because they suck. I come to find out later that the guy who asked me that was an Oracle guy from background, and Oracle cursors work completely differently than in SQL Server. So I'm like, okay, that's why I bombed that interview, because he was approaching it from an Oracle perspective, and they were trying to build a SQL Server environment. Well, tough luck.
So it's really their loss more because they're probably writing a lot of curses in SQL Server and griping how Oracle's so much better or something.
It was a major financial organization that was trying to migrate their data warehouse from Oracle to SQL Server. So they were hiring a SQL Server subject matter expert. So, all right. Well, if there are no other, oh, hey, let's see, Curtis. DBA tools is great, but learning these basic PowerShell features is invaluable. It's absolutely. DBA tools does have some bugs and anomalies. I've stumbled across a couple of them. It is open source after all. I mean, heck, SQL Server has a handful of bugs that Microsoft may or may not be fixing on a regular basis. So, but you know,
Curtis, there's one, and I cannot remember what it is. I ended up writing an article about it. Something I started to do in PowerShell. I found it's kind of like stop services, get start service. Not that, but something else where DBA tools had one half the answer where I could do part of it, but didn't have the other half. And I had to script myself. I was kind of surprised. It's been on my plate of I should write this module for DBA tools because they only have half the answer. So you're right. It is great, but again, open source, so it has what people have written for it, and it only gets better when people write for it. Well, if nobody else has any other questions or comments, I want to thank everybody for joining me. Raymond, you and I both, back in those days. Please get in touch with me. I did see this comment about this question about the one script. I will try to get that up when I can. And feel free to reach out to me. I always love to get feedback and everything like that. So thank you all.
Outstanding. Thank you. Thank you, Greg. That was a lot of fun. And I hope you all had a good time with this particular presentation. So I'm going to say that we shall take a 10-minute break and then I will be back. Our next speaker will be Ben Miller coming up at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. So stick around, but in the meantime, go, get some food, get a drink or whatever, whatever floats your boat. So we'll see everyone back here in a few minutes. And I'm going to put up a quick placeholder slide.